The rain hammered against the windows of the small coffee shop as Sarah Martinez sat in the corner booth, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. She had been traveling for 3 days straight, catching buses from one small town to another, trying to reach her sister's wedding in Colorado. The tattoo on her left forearm caught the dim light filtering through the window, a detail anchor surrounded by rope and stars, with the words Semper Fidelis written in elegant script below it. Sarah had gotten the tattoo during her final week of basic training at Paris Island, along with her entire squad. It was a symbol of their bond, their commitment, and the brotherhood that had carried them through some of the toughest months of their lives. But that felt like a lifetime ago now, even though it had only been 2 years since she left the military. The bus station was just across the street, and her connection wouldn't arrive for another hour. She had been making good time despite the delays caused by the spring storms that had been battering the Midwest for the past week. The wedding was in 2 days, and she was determined not to miss it. Maria was her only sister, and they had promised each other years ago that nothing would keep them apart for such an important day. A group of young men entered the coffee shop, shaking rain from their jackets and speaking loudly about their plans for the evening. Sarah noticed them immediately, their nervous energy, the way they kept checking their phones, and, most importantly, the small packages they were passing between each other under the table. Her military training kicked in automatically. She had learned to read situations quickly, to notice details that others might miss. One of the men, a tall guy with a spider web tattoo on his neck, kept glancing in her direction. Sarah pretended to read the paperback novel she had picked up at the last bus station, but she was actually watching their reflection in the window. The packages looked like small bundles wrapped in plastic, and the way they were handling them suggested they contained something valuable and illegal. The conversation at their table grew more animated, and Sarah caught fragments of their discussion about meeting someone at the warehouse district later that night. She knew she should probably leave, but something about the situation made her stay. Maybe it was her sense of duty, or maybe it was just curiosity, but she found herself listening more intently. 20 minutes later, the men left as suddenly as they had arrived. Sarah waited a few more minutes before gathering her backpack and heading toward the door. As she stepped outside, she noticed a police car parked across the street near the bus station. 2 officers were standing beside it, and they seemed to be watching the coffee shop. She approached the bus station, checking the schedule board for her connection. Everything appeared to be on time despite the weather. As she stood there, she became aware that one of the police officers was walking toward her. He was middle-aged with graying hair and the confident stride of someone who had been in law enforcement for many years. "Excuse me, miss," Officer Reynolds said as he approached. "I'm going to need to see some identification." Sarah reached into her backpack for her driver's license, wondering what this could be about. "Is there a problem, officer?" "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area," Reynolds explained, examining her license carefully. "Sarah Martinez from Texas. What brings you to our little town?" "I'm traveling to my sister's wedding in Colorado," Sarah replied honestly. "Just waiting for my connecting bus." Officer Reynolds looked at her more closely, his eyes moving to her tattoo and then back to her face. Something in his expression changed, becoming more suspicious rather than less. "That's an interesting tattoo you have there." "Military?" "Yes, sir." "Marine Corps," Sarah answered with pride. "Really?" Reynolds exchanged a glance with his partner, who had now joined them. "And when exactly did you serve?" Sarah provided the dates of her service, but she could see that the officers weren't entirely convinced. The second officer, whose name tag read Martinez, no relation, despite the shared surname, began asking more detailed questions about her military background. "Look, I can show you my discharge papers if you need verification," Sarah offered, reaching for her backpack again. "Hold on there," Officer Martinez said quickly, his hand moving to his weapon. "Keep your hands where we can see them." The situation was escalating rapidly, and Sarah couldn't understand why. She had been completely cooperative and truthful. "Officers, I'm not sure what this is about, but I haven't done anything wrong. We've been tracking a drug operation in this area," Reynolds explained. "And you fit the description of someone we're looking for. Young woman, dark hair, military tattoo." Sarah felt her heart sink. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and her appearance apparently matched that of a suspect. I understand you have a job to do, but I'm not involved in any drug operation. I'm just trying to get to my sister's wedding. That's what they all say, Officer Martinez replied. We're going to need you to come with us for questioning. The next hour passed in a blur of confusion and frustration. Sarah found herself at the local police station, sitting in a small interview room while the officers tried to verify her story. They had confiscated her belongings, including her discharge papers and the invitation to her sister's wedding. Detective Linda Harper took over the case, a stern woman in her 40s who had apparently been working the drug investigation for months. She studied Sarah's military records with interest, but her questions suggested she wasn't entirely convinced of Sarah's innocence. Your story checks out on paper, Detective Harper said, but we have witness reports of someone matching your description meeting with known drug dealers in the area. I was in the coffee shop across from the bus station, Sarah explained for the third time. There were some men there who seemed suspicious, but I had nothing to do with them. Convenient story, Harper replied. And that tattoo of yours, we've been told that the drug ring uses military tattoos as a way to identify each other. Sarah was stunned. Her tattoo, which represented honor and service, was now being used as evidence against her. Detective, that tattoo represents my commitment to my country and my fellow Marines. It has nothing to do with drugs. But Detective Harper seemed skeptical. The circumstantial evidence was piling up, and Sarah realized with growing horror that she might actually be charged with a crime she didn't commit. The wedding was in less than 2 days, and instead of celebrating with her sister, she was sitting in a police station trying to prove her innocence. As evening fell, Sarah was formally arrested on suspicion of drug trafficking. The charges were based on witness testimony, her presence in the area, and what the police called indicators consistent with known criminal patterns. Her phone call to her sister was heartbreaking. She had to explain that she might not make it to the wedding. The local jail was small and relatively quiet, but Sarah had never felt so alone. She lay on the narrow bunk in her cell, staring at the ceiling and wondering how her life had taken such a dramatic turn. Tomorrow, she would meet with a court-appointed attorney and try to fight these charges, but tonight, all she could do was hope that somehow the truth would come to light. Her tattoo, visible even in the dim light of the cell, reminded her of the values she had learned in the Marines: honor, courage, and commitment. She would need all three to get through this ordeal and clear her name. Somewhere out there, the real criminals were still free, while she sat behind bars for crimes she had never committed. The night stretched endlessly ahead, filled with uncertainty and fear. But Sarah Martinez was a Marine, and Marines don't give up easily. She would fight these charges and prove her innocence, no matter how long it took. Sarah spent a restless night in the holding cell, listening to the sounds of the small-town jail settling around her. The rain continued to pound against the single window, creating a steady rhythm that matched her anxious thoughts. Every hour that passed meant she was getting closer to missing her sister's wedding, and the weight of that possibility felt heavier than the criminal charges themselves. At 6 a.m, a guard brought her a tray of institutional breakfast and informed her that her court-appointed attorney would arrive within the hour. Sarah had little appetite, but she forced herself to eat, knowing she would need her strength for whatever lay ahead. Attorney James Walsh arrived precisely at 7, a tired-looking man in his 50s carrying a worn briefcase and the demeanor of someone who had handled too many cases with too little time. He sat across from Sarah in the small conference room and spread her file across the metal table. Miss Martinez, I'm going to be honest with you, Walsh began without preamble. The evidence against you is circumstantial, but it's substantial. You were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and your appearance matches witness descriptions of a suspected drug courier. But I'm not a drug courier, Sarah insisted. I'm a former Marine traveling to my sister's wedding. Walsh nodded absently as he flipped through police reports. The problem is that your military background actually works against you here. The police believe this drug ring specifically recruits veterans because of their discipline and ability to follow orders without question. Sarah felt sick to her stomach. Everything that should have worked in her favor, her military service, her tattoo, her disciplined appearance, was being twisted into evidence of guilt. What about the men I saw in the coffee shop? I told the police about them. They checked the coffee shop's security cameras, Walsh replied. The footage shows you sitting alone for most of your time there. The men you described don't appear clearly enough to identify, and their activities look like normal customer behavior. The attorney continued explaining the case against her, and, with each detail, Sarah's situation seemed more hopeless. The prosecution had witness testimony placing someone matching her description at 3 different locations where drug deals had allegedly taken place over the past month. Of course, Sarah had been nowhere near this town during those times, but proving that would be difficult without concrete evidence. There is one piece of good news, Walsh said, finally, looking up from the papers. The preliminary hearing isn't until next week, which gives us time to investigate your alibi and gather evidence. But my sister's wedding is tomorrow, Sarah said desperately. Can't we get bail? Walsh shook his head grimly. Given the nature of the charges and the fact that you're from out of state, the judge is unlikely to grant bail. I'm sorry, Miss Martinez, but you're probably going to be here for at least another week. After the attorney left, Sarah was returned to her cell where she spent the morning staring at the walls and trying to process her situation. She had served her country with honor, had never been in trouble with the law, and was now facing serious felony charges that could result in years in prison. Around noon, there was a commotion in the hallway outside her cell. Sarah could hear multiple voices and the sound of heavy footsteps. A few minutes later, the jail door opened and Detective Harper appeared, followed by a man Sarah didn't recognize. The stranger was tall and distinguished-looking, probably in his early 60s, with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. He wore a navy dress uniform with multiple ribbons and insignia that indicated high rank. Sarah noticed immediately that he was an admiral, though she couldn't make out the specific details of his service record from across the cell. Miss Martinez, Detective Harper said, unlocking the cell door. This is Admiral Robert Chen. He's asked to speak with you. Sarah stood respectfully as the Admiral entered the small cell. His eyes immediately went to her tattoo, and she saw something change in his expression: recognition, followed by what looked like surprise and, then, concern. Marines, Admiral Chen said quietly, studying the intricate details of her tattoo. 3rd Battalion, I would guess, based on the specific design elements. Sarah was startled. Yes, sir. 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marines. How did you know? Admiral Chen smiled for the first time since entering the cell. Because I was the commanding officer who approved that particular tattoo design for your unit. Each battalion had slight variations in the anchor and rope pattern, and I remember this one specifically because it was so well executed. Detective Harper looked confused. Admiral, I don't understand. What does this have to do with our drug investigation? The Admiral turned to face the detective, and his expression grew stern. Detective Harper, this young woman is not your drug courier. That tattoo represents one of the most decorated units I ever had the privilege to command. Miss Martinez and her fellow Marines served with distinction in Afghanistan, and several members of her squad received commendations for valor. But, sir, Harper protested, the witness descriptions, her presence in the area, are circumstantial at best, Admiral Chen interrupted. I know this because I've been consulting on your drug investigation for the past 2 weeks. The real courier you're looking for is someone using military symbols to avoid suspicion, but that person is not a genuine veteran. Sarah felt as if she could breathe again for the first time since her arrest. Admiral, how did you know I was here? I've been reviewing all arrests related to the drug case, he explained. When I saw your file and the photograph of your tattoo, I knew immediately that either you were genuine or someone had done an extraordinary amount of research into military insignia. Given your service record, which I verified this morning, I knew you were the real deal. Admiral Chen turned back to Detective Harper. Furthermore, I can provide you with Miss Martinez's exact location during the times when your alleged drug deals took place. She was participating in a veteran support program in Texas, and I have documentation to prove it. The detective looked embarrassed and frustrated. Admiral, if you had this information, why didn't you share it sooner? Because I only received Miss Martinez's complete file this morning, he replied firmly. If your department had bothered to conduct a thorough background check instead of rushing to judgment based on superficial evidence, this situation could have been avoided entirely. Over the next hour, Admiral Chen worked with Detective Harper to review the evidence against Sarah. It became clear that the case was built on mistaken identity and coincidence rather than actual criminal activity. The witness descriptions were vague, and the supposed connection to the military tattoo was based on speculation rather than fact. Sarah learned that the real drug ring was indeed using fake military tattoos and stolen veteran identification to avoid suspicion, but they were not actual veterans. The Admiral had been working with federal agencies to track down this group, and Sarah's arrest had actually delayed their investigation. Miss Martinez, Admiral Chen said as the paperwork for her release was being prepared, I want to personally apologize for what you've been through. Your service to this country deserved better than this. Thank you, sir, Sarah replied, feeling emotional for the first time since her arrest. I was starting to think that no one would believe me. A Marine's word is their bond, the Admiral said solemnly. And that tattoo you wear represents values that mean something. Don't let this experience diminish your pride in your service. Detective Harper approached them with the release papers. Miss Martinez, you're free to go. All charges have been dropped, and we'll make sure this arrest is expunged from your record. As Sarah gathered her belongings, she realized that her bus had long since departed. The wedding was tomorrow evening, and she was still hundreds of miles away with no reliable transportation. Admiral Chen seemed to read her thoughts. Miss Martinez, where exactly do you need to be? My sister's wedding in Colorado, sir. But I've missed my bus connections, and I don't think I can make it in time now. The Admiral smiled. Well, it just so happens that I have a Navy transport plane leaving for Colorado Springs in 2 hours. I think we can find room for one more passenger. For the first time in days, Sarah felt like everything might work out after all. Her nightmare was ending, and she might still make it to the most important day in her sister's life. As she prepared to leave the jail that had held her unjustly, she touched her tattoo and remembered why she had been proud to serve her country in the first place. The military transport plane touched down at Colorado Springs just as the sun was beginning to set on the day before Maria's wedding. Sarah looked out the small window as they taxied to the terminal, feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion that she had never experienced before. Admiral Chen had spent most of the flight explaining how the drug investigation had been ongoing for months, and how her arrest had actually provided them with valuable information about the criminals' methods. The irony, Admiral Chen had explained during the flight, is that these criminals thought using military symbols would make them invisible to law enforcement. They didn't count on someone like me who actually knows what those symbols mean and who earned the right to wear them. As they disembarked, Admiral Chen handed Sarah his business card. Miss Martinez, if you ever need anything related to your military service or if this experience has any lasting consequences, please don't hesitate to contact me. What happened to you was unjust, and I want to make sure it doesn't happen to any other veterans. Sarah thanked the Admiral profusely and caught a taxi to the hotel where her family was staying. The ride through the Colorado mountains gave her time to process everything that had happened. 3 days ago, she had been a simple traveler heading to a family celebration. Now, she felt like she had lived through a lifetime of experiences that had tested her faith in justice and her understanding of what her military service really meant. Maria was in her hotel room with their mother and 2 bridesmaids when Sarah knocked on the door. The reunion was emotional, with tears of relief and joy mixed together as Sarah explained what had happened. Their mother, Rosa Martinez, held her daughter tightly and whispered prayers of gratitude in Spanish. I thought I was going to have to get married without my maid of honor, Maria said through her tears. When you called from jail, I almost bought a plane ticket to come get you myself. You know I wouldn't miss this for anything, Sarah replied. Not even wrongful imprisonment could keep me away from your big day. The next morning brought beautiful weather and the bustle of wedding preparations. Sarah threw herself into helping with last-minute details, grateful to focus on something positive after the ordeal she had been through. As she helped Maria with her dress and makeup, she found herself thinking about the events of the past few days and what they had taught her. The wedding ceremony was held in a small chapel nestled in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. Sarah stood at the altar as maid of honor, watching her sister exchange vows with David, a kind-hearted teacher she had met in graduate school. During the ceremony, Sarah caught sight of her tattoo in the afternoon light streaming through the stained glass windows, and she thought about Admiral Chen's words about honor and service. At the reception, Sarah found herself telling the story of her arrest and rescue to family members and wedding guests. Each time she recounted the events, she marveled at how quickly her situation had changed once someone who understood military culture had become involved. Uncle Roberto, a Vietnam veteran, listened to her story with particular interest. "You know, Mija," he said after she finished, "what happened to you shows why we veterans need to stick together. That admiral didn't have to get involved, but he did because he recognized what your service meant." Sarah nodded, understanding for the first time how her military experience had created connections that extended far beyond her active service. The tattoo on her arm wasn't just a decoration or even just a personal symbol, it was a badge that connected her to a community of people who shared common values and experiences. During the dancing portion of the reception, Sarah was approached by David's father, who introduced himself as retired Army Colonel James Patterson. He had heard about her recent experience from other family members. "Miss Martinez," Colonel Patterson said, "I wanted to thank you for your service and to tell you how sorry I am about what you went through. Unfortunately, there are people who try to take advantage of the respect that military service commands." "It turned out okay in the end, sir," Sarah replied. "Admiral Chen made sure of that." "Bob Chin is a good man," the colonel said with a smile. "I've known him for 20 years. He told me about your case when I spoke with him this morning." Sarah was surprised. "You spoke with Admiral Chen?" "He wanted to make sure you were doing well and that you made it to the wedding safely. He also wanted me to tell you that the drug investigation has made significant progress thanks to information gathered during your arrest. They expect to make several more arrests within the week." As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself reflecting on how the worst experience of her life had led to unexpected connections and revelations. She had learned that her military service created bonds that extended far beyond her time in uniform, and that the values represented by her tattoo meant something real to people she had never met. Late in the evening, as the reception was winding down, Sarah stepped outside onto the hotel balcony to get some fresh air. The Colorado mountains stood silhouetted against the star-filled sky, and, for the first time in days, she felt completely at peace. Maria joined her on the balcony, still wearing her wedding dress but with her shoes kicked off and her hair coming loose from its elaborate style. "I can't believe everything you went through to get here," she said, linking arms with her sister. "It was worth it," Sarah replied simply. "I wouldn't have missed this day for anything." "I know you wouldn't have," Maria said. "That's what makes you such an amazing sister and such an amazing Marine." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars and listening to the faint sounds of celebration continuing inside the hotel. Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, not just the literal journey across several states, but the emotional and psychological journey that had tested her character and revealed truths about herself and her community. 3 weeks later, Sarah received a letter from Admiral Chen informing her that the drug investigation had been successfully concluded. 7 people had been arrested in connection with the trafficking ring, including the men she had observed in the coffee shop. The fake military tattoos and stolen veteran identifications had been part of an elaborate scheme to avoid detection by exploiting the respect that law enforcement typically showed to veterans. The letter also included an invitation to attend a ceremony honoring veterans who had contributed to the investigation. Sarah was surprised to learn that her ordeal had provided crucial information that helped law enforcement understand how the criminals operated. At the ceremony, held at a naval base in San Diego, Sarah met several other veterans who had been targeted or impersonated by the criminal organization. She learned that her case had not been isolated, there had been a pattern of criminals using military symbols to avoid suspicion while conducting illegal activities. Admiral Chen spoke at the ceremony about the importance of protecting the integrity of military service and ensuring that symbols of honor weren't exploited by those who had never earned the right to wear them. He specifically mentioned Sarah's case as an example of how misunderstanding and rushed judgment could harm innocent veterans. The tattoo that Miss Martinez wears represents sacrifice, dedication, and service to something greater than oneself, Admiral Chen told the assembled crowd. When criminals appropriate these symbols for their own purposes, they attack not just individuals but the very values that our military represents. After the ceremony, Sarah approached Admiral Chen to thank him once again for his intervention in her case. He smiled and shook her hand warmly. "Miss Martinez, I hope you understand that what I did wasn't exceptional. It's what any veteran should do for another. We have an obligation to look out for each other, regardless of which branch of service we came from or when we served." Sarah returned home to Texas with a new understanding of what her military service meant, not just to her personally, but to a larger community of veterans and active service members. She began volunteering with a local veterans organization, helping other former service members navigate challenges related to employment, education, and legal issues. Her experience had taught her that the values symbolized by her tattoo, honor, courage, and commitment, weren't just personal principles but shared bonds that connected her to thousands of other people who had chosen to serve their country. The anchor, rope, and stars inked into her skin had once nearly led to her imprisonment, but ultimately they had been her salvation, recognized by someone who understood their true meaning. Months later, when people asked Sarah about her tattoo, she would tell them not just about her military service, but about the day when those symbols had saved her from injustice and connected her to a community she was proud to be part of. Her ordeal had ended up strengthening rather than diminishing her faith in the values that had led her to serve in the first place. The wedding photos from Maria's ceremony showed Sarah standing proudly at the altar, her tattoo visible as she held her sister's bouquet. In those images, captured on one of the happiest days of their family's life, the anchor and stars represented not just Sarah's past service, but her ongoing commitment to the principles that had guided her through both triumph and adversity.